Hi everybody, thanks very much for joining Jeremy and I today for the third webinar in that 5 and 5 series. So today we're looking at why don't consumers love brands anymore? So today we're going to be looking at, obviously, why don't consumers want relationships with a brand anymore, but we're also going to be looking at to find out what it is that they do want. So as per usual, we will answer all of your questions at the end of the webinar, and you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag 5 and 5, and you can also download the slides from the widget within the board now. Over to you, Jeremy.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, thanks for joining us. As you know, we like to do some slightly different things on these, and we try and mix it up every session just because you guys have taken an hour out of your day from whatever it is that you're doing. So we want to try and make sure that we add enough value to what it is you're doing and maybe show you some stuff that you've not seen before. Love to maybe confirm some things that you've already had in the back of your mind and kind of try and reinforce why what you're doing is heading in the right direction. And also maybe help you to think a little bit differently about maybe some of the things that you've not considered. And this is something that's been on my mind for quite a while. We're going to cover a huge amount of ground today. And what I'd like this to be, and we're going to try and get through it in about 45, 50 minutes, I would love it to be more of a conversation. And by all means, we're going to continue the conversation on Twitter afterwards. But in some of the previous webinars that we've done, we've talked a lot about technical stuff. And we're going to cover some data and some stats and things just to give evidence to what it is we're talking about. But we're talking about love today. We're talking about emotions and how to get people to fall in love with an idea or a brand or a company, and also to see if that's even possible. So we're going to stay away from some of the technical stuff. More than happy to engage in technical questions later on. If you guys have got any, what technology allows you to do this? We'll talk a little bit about Watson later on. We couldn't not, could we? But really want to try and tell a few stories. And we've been having some debates on Twitter for the last few days and also at the last couple of conferences that I've been to, just about this idea of not just why don't customers love brands anymore, but did they ever? Is that a little bit strong? Is it even possible to get people to love a brand? And what exactly does that mean? And what does that look like? So as you can see, this is the series of webinars. We're halfway through. This is why don't customers love brands anymore? We've looked at our audience and we've looked at what customers really want. And these are really the questions that should be on our mind as we go forward. A couple of the reasons for this. You guys have heard me talk in the past. You've probably heard me talk about the biggest challenges that we're facing at the moment. We've spent a lot of time talking about dark social and how emotional content is now shared in private messaging apps. It's not shared publicly. We've talked a lot about how within a few years, for example, about 30-40% of browsing behavior is going to happen without a screen. Retailers are abandoning apps and coming back to mobile responsive apps. Different types of technologies, all the data's dark. Privacy is now a really big thing. People don't want to share their information with marketers anymore. We want to cover all of this. But at the heart of everything that we do is storytelling. So despite the fact that technology is changing so fast, despite the fact that I do believe, that consumer relationships, the way that those relationships have been built using technology have changed dramatically over the last couple of years. And it's highly likely that between now and 2020, they're going to change more than they have over the last 20 years. That's quite possible with some of the changes and the lack of attention span and just the amount of noise that we've now got to fight our way through. It's quite possible that that's going to be the case. But one of the things that hasn't changed for hundreds and hundreds of years is storytelling. How do we get people to fall in love with our idea, our story, our pitch, whatever it is that we stand for? And the way that you use those different types of emotions to communicate with people is no different than what brands are trying to do now than what we've been trying to do for communities for hundreds and thousands of years. So we're going to cover a little bit of that anymore as well. So I don't want you guys to agree with everything that I say. Certainly, I'm quite sure you won't. We've got a few provocative things in here as well. But I'd really like just to try and spark a few conversations. So start dropping some things in the chat box, start tweeting us and having a look. And let me just give you some context for where this came from. First of all, and we're going to come back to my good friend Javier Sanchez-Lamales shortly, but he wrote a book called Marketing, which is about the heart and brain of marketing. He jokes at the beginning of his book that love consists in overestimating the difference between one woman and another. Beautiful quote from George Bernard Shaw. And he also goes to talk about, he was one of the top marketers globally for Coca-Cola, and he talked about how his job was making people fall in love with Coca-Cola's brand. He says, I'm in the business of making people fall in love with my brand. Now, that's Coca-Cola, right? They're selling sugared water. Now, their Coca-Cola network is doing incredible things. If you want to get drugs anywhere in the world, could argue that one of the quickest ways to get it there, whether there's a crisis or there's some type of epidemic, whatever it is, the Coca-Cola network is one of the fastest ways to get it there. Their logistics and supply chain is absolutely incredible. They invest a huge amount of their money in clean water, for example. But then, do you really love Coke? I grew up drinking ridiculous amounts of Coke when I used to play tennis every day. But do you really love them, or do you just like them? And how much does loyalty play into all of that? So as we were putting this series together, what actually happened, I was watching this video that you'll see on screen. We're not going to play it for you now, but if you've not seen it, you've got to go and watch it. This is the tale of Thomas Burberry. It was created at the back end of last year. A lot of you will be familiar with Burberry, an iconic British fashion brand. You'll probably be familiar with their checks and the issues that they had years ago with a lot of fakes that were coming through. But what a lot of you may not be familiar with is where they started from. They invented gabardine. They invented a way that you could actually wax the threads before it was woven together to make it waterproof, and it was still light and breathable. This is in the very late 18th, early 19th century. That's where trench coats came from the soldiers in the trenches. Shackleton, who went to the South Pole, he used Burberry trench coats and he used Burberry apparel when he was going out there. And in this movie, which is about 3 minutes, 35 minutes long, it talks to you about where Burberry came from. And I remember watching it, and I had a tear in my eye just because I'm a marketer and I'm a big softie and very sentimental. So I'm much closer to the idea of falling in love with a brand or an idea than most people. We'll get into a debate later on whether or not customers who don't care about marketing actually love brands or ideas. But I remember watching this video and thinking, if you wanted to fall in love with a brand or a company, I couldn't see a better way of doing that than in that 3 minutes 35, the tale of Thomas Burberry. And the emotions, it's like you're watching a little mini movie, and it distills everything that Burberry stands for, the reason that their company exists, the reason that people love their garments. You talk about love being overestimating the value between women. Why would people spend hundreds or thousands of pounds more on Burberry garments when they're just as functional for the most part, right? It's like buying a 4x4 that you're never going to take off road. It's just as functional as something much cheaper. But why is it that we fall in love with these ideas to the idea that you end up spending a lot more money on them? Now, one of the things that Burberry's been fantastic at, and this is just a screenshot from the Art of the Trench. I remember when I started off in social media, and it was the same thing. It was how do we connect with people emotionally? How do we connect with people on a level where they want to share content, and certainly where they want to share it publicly? Now, back when the Art of the Trench was built, when it was developed, this was people from within the Burberry community who loved their brand, that desperately wanted to not just express their sense of style, but their association and their affiliation with Burberry. And there was value that they had as a result of being associated with that brand. And as you can see, there was lots of fantastic pictures that people uploaded. And that idea of a community is really what drove Burberry to become one of the biggest social media brands in the world. I mean, lots of people look to Burberry now as being best in class. Now, one of the shifts that we've seen is that all that pieces of emotional content, all the stuff that used to be shared on a lot of public social networks is no longer shared. So the things you're most passionate about, music, TV, fashion, film, sport, a lot of that stuff is now shared in private networks. So you're on WhatsApp maybe sending people the photograph of the beautiful trench coat that you've just bought, and maybe you're less likely to upload it to their blog or to tweet it or drop it on their Facebook page. But the idea of a community still remains the same. It's just a group of people surrounded by a common set of values and beliefs. Now, there's different levels of love, just like you have different levels of friendship groups. Robin Dunbar, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dunbar's number, but Robin Dunbar wrote this fantastic book about how many friends is it possible for a person to have. And his research, based upon monkeys, actually, from a long time ago, he basically looked at the size of the neocortex and expanded that out for the human brain. And he figured out, how many relationships is it scientifically possible for us to maintain? And he figured out it was 150. But what he did is he went back and looked at those groups of 150 to try and figure out what happens when you have different types of friendship groups. And if you make another 10 friends, you don't get 160 friends. 10 of your friends that you've not seen for a while drop out. And we maintain that group of 150. And what it might be is 5 or 10 friends that are very, very close, that know everything that's going on in your life. There may be a small group of people you want to spend an entire weekend or a holiday with. There's a slightly bigger group of people you'd go out for dinner with or to a party. And there's going to be up to about 150 people that are your colleagues and people that you know personally. They know what's going on in your life, and you've got a one-to-one relationship with them, but it's not incredibly personal. And really, we can kind of look at the brands as the same. So as we go through this, as we talk over the next kind of half an hour, 40 minutes, I think that's what this is coming down to, because people have black and white views of, is it possible to love a brand or fall in love with a brand? It's not binary. It's not black and white. There's 50 shades of grey in between all the different ways that you could love a brand or an idea. So it's not the case that people may or may not love Coca-Cola. Some people absolutely passionately will. Of course they will. I remember when I was at Facebook a few years ago, we were looking at some research around brands like Heineken. And Heineken's trying to decide with the digital budget that it's got, how much more of its money should it spend on Facebook. And you may be looking at the brand budget for Champions League. And the whole idea of that is that the more people are talking about it, the more people love the brand. Hopefully the more people are going to go out and drink Heineken. And we started to do some research. We started to look at some of the numbers, like the economic values of groups of people, of clusters of communities, some of which are only 150, and you take all of those segments and add them together. You may have the 7 or 8 million people that Heineken had on their page at the time. We started to do some surveys to see, they were basically social NPS surveys, on a scale of 1 to 10, how likely are you to recommend this brand to your friend? These were anonymous surveys. We tried to do sample sizes in fake areas where we weren't selling the beer, just to make sure that statistically it was a high level of confidence at the numbers that we got back. And never forget, one of the numbers that we saw was, if you've liked Heineken on Facebook, you would be 64% likely to recommend Heineken to your friends when you're in the pub. So when you've got all the different beer taps in front of you and you don't know which one to buy, and maybe your friend says, I want a lager and there's 5 different ones, if you've liked them on Facebook, the assumption was you would be 64% more likely. And a lot of that was connected with the emotional connection with Heineken. But, really, would you have made that decision anyway, even if you didn't like them? People started reading all sorts of stuff into that about, the value of a Facebook like is $138. And it was ridiculous. And it fell to bits. And even some of the companies that had researched that, companies like Syncaps, ended up going bankrupt a couple of years later. But it spoke to something much bigger. It spoke to this idea of, can you have a relationship with a brand? And to what degree do you love or not that brand? To what degree is it transactional? And to what degree are you in love with them? We look at Facebook communities. This is how Facebook has been built. Look at Lego communities and Marvel communities. You look at people that are passionate about Heinz tomato ketchup or Marmite, and you see the April Fools when they threaten to, we're going to release it, we're going to cancel this brand, and there's uproar, and it's front pages, and there's Facebook fan pages, and there's groups of people campaigning to bring it back or not take it away. That is such an extreme emotion. Is that love, or is that loyalty? So where all this comes from, and this is where we start getting into the flip side of this, is that a lot of people don't want a relationship with a brand. They just want an experience, or they want a brand that works and that understands them and knows what they want when they want it, especially when things go wrong. Look at the British Airways issues over the last couple of days. Look at anything that happens when things fall to bits and there's a crisis. You don't really want a relationship with a brand. You just want to have a good enough conversation with them that they know who you are, that they understand your wants and your needs and your interests, and what conversation, the context for all of your interactions with them over the previous few years. So when Harvard released this report about 18 months ago saying, over 3/4 of people don't want a relationship with a brand, people start taking notice of that. And a lot of marketers started talking about it as well. Some people have been chatting to me on Twitter saying nobody wants a relationship with a brand, and we'll get into that in about 15 minutes' time. So when you look at agencies like Interbrand, now I'm not going to go through all of this. This is a 30-minute conversation on its own. If you're interested in the 30 minutes behind this slide, Go on my Vimeo, vimeo.com/jpwaite. I talk about all the background to this slide. Interbrand is one of the best brand agencies, if not the best in the world. Now, the idea of Interbrand is they're trying to value the emotional component of what goes in your head when you think about a company. Essentially, what they're trying to do is to value how much do you love a brand or not. So really what the chart is showing is when you've got Interbrand trying to put an economic value on what different brands are worth, really what they're doing is trying to quantify types of love, and they're trying to quantify what that emotional connection looks like. So all of these different lines are telling various different stories, which I expand upon in my little Vimeo clip. But really, you could also look at this from the context of this is people falling in and out of love with brands. And this is when there's a crisis. For example, Toyota dropped off because they had an issue with accelerator pedals, that there was a couple of them that were recalled, and it was a little bit sticky. There was an issue with people then getting worried about Toyota. They got everything together. They came back a couple of years later. You look at Coca-Cola, for example, that they've dropped. You know, you would argue maybe that people don't love them as much, but the tech brands which have now overtaken our lives, you know, the association that we have with Apple, for example, the most loved brand in the world, $750 billion plus. You know, we've got relationships with them. Is that love, or is that a transactional relationship? So I thought, well, what does that mean in my life? I thought, well, let me have a look at just a particular brand. I'm just going to pick one because this is one of the brands that's really run through my life from long before I ever knew that I wanted to get into marketing. What you've got here is Nike and a couple of the shoes that I've had. I've always loved Nike, and I'm not ashamed to say that's not a like brand, that's an absolute love brand. From the early days of Nike when they actually built it, from 1972, from when Phil Knight and Bill Bowerman actually built the brand, and all the things that happened afterwards, Steve Prefontaine, all the stories about the first sponsored athlete, the rebellious nature of the brand, all the things that they've done to build it up. It's been consistent throughout my life, and I was thinking about it as I was putting this webinar together. And I thought back to my first set of track spikes, those Nike Vanquettes that are at the top left. You know, I fell in love with those spikes the first moment I saw them, and it took me about 18 months, 2 years to get them. So when I got them on my birthday, those were my prized possession when I was running my 600, 800 meters. You've got the Nike Air Jordans, the Air Jordan 7, the first pair of Jordans that I ever owned. The first paycheck that I got, I went out and bought a pair of those, the Jordans from 92. The Tiger Woods golf shoe, when I took up golf, you know, I fell in love with the idea of the brand through Tiger Woods when I saw him win the Masters by that ridiculous 21-point margin. Absolutely fell in love with the idea of golf and what Tiger Woods was standing for at the time. I was looking at Tiger as coming through as really bringing golf to the masses in the way that Jordan did to baseball. And then Lance Armstrong. I'm a very keen cyclist, and I loved the Live Strong brand right from the beginning, and was clinging on to the bitter end, defending Lance and thinking he couldn't possibly have done all the things that he did. I had Sebastian Coe's poster on my wall in 1984 for the Olympics, you know, connected to those shoes. You looked at Jordan, there's a lot of iconic prints of him jumping from the free throw line in these shoes. You think about Tiger Woods and the legacy, all the stories that he's had and that emotional connection, and I think back to all the Tour de France's that I've watched. But it also, you can tell where this is going, can't you? It brings in a darker side of love, because you also start bringing in those polarized emotions about how much do you love something and how much do you hate it. This is a marketer's job. It isn't just to tell stories to get people to fall in love with brands. It's also to manage crises. It's also when things go wrong, what is it that we do to make sure that we respond in real time? Real-time personalization, which is what a lot of marketing technology is for, it's not just to build more profitable relationships. It's to build more loyal ones and more meaningful ones. And a lot of those relationships are built when things go horribly wrong. Bill Gates famously said 10 words a few years ago. He was talking about this whole idea of, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. So what happens, for example, when you have someone that absolutely adores Nike because of golf and they've grown up with Tiger and everything that he did, and then you see him over the weekend with the DUI, and you see this huge fall from grace, and you look at the impact on that brand, and you look at, it's incredibly sad, and all the other stories aside, that breaks my heart to see the fact that he's on his fifth back operation. He's grown up with golf. He's grown up with Nike, and Nike stood by him all the time. You think about Lance Armstrong's interview after he came back and said all the things that he did with Oprah. There's a fantastic documentary. Let me recommend something to you if you get the chance. It's on Netflix. You can also go and see it on Vimeo and YouTube. And it's a Visionaries series. It's called The Art of Design. I posted a tweet to it a couple of days ago. And one of them is by Tinker Hatfield. And Tinker Hatfield is basically the head of design of Nike. And what he did throughout that documentary is he talks about the marketing side of how do you get people to fall in love with a brand or an idea. But he also talks about how athletes with the right personality can challenge an entire sport. And those 10 words are really where marketers try and look for celebrity endorsement. They try and look at who's the guy that I get to say nice things about our brand. But then if you do start investing all that money in that celebrity and things go wrong, then what? That's when it's up to the marketer to respond respectfully in real time to try and manage that crisis. When do you drop the celebrity? When do you stand by them and defend them? And it's a great documentary. You should check it out. He goes back and looks at people like Agassi and the way that Andre Agassi at the time, the anti-country club, completely revolutionized tennis at the time in the early 90s. I like to look at the other stories, not just the ones that marketers say, but the reasons that companies exist. And this, again, is one of the reasons why marketers forget what it is of the job that they're trying to do. The reason this is important as well is because if it is true, and obviously it's different for every brand, all you guys on the line, you're going to have a completely different stat about how many of these conversations are now taking place privately and that Facebook and Twitter no longer work in the way that they do, the way that you may be looking at Snap and Instagram and YouTube and other different types of mechanics to engage with people. We want to tell better stories that connect with people emotionally, and the only way that we're going to do that is by sometimes going back to the legacy of why is it that you connect with that company. And in today's super fast-paced, 5-second attention span, we want to go and sell the jeans that go and do the thing with the discount, and we look at the features and the functions and the salvage and the canvas and the cut and the celebrity that's wearing it. Often we forget about the stories of where these brands came from. And Levi Strauss, this is a beautiful picture, isn't it? This is from the workshop in the very early days. Levi Strauss is a great example. I'm going to give you another personal, fantastic one just next. Levi Strauss never wanted to build a denim brand. He moved with his family. He moved from New York to San Francisco. The idea was he was going to capitalize on the gold rush. Everyone was out there trying to make their fortune. They were trying to pan for gold, and they were trying to, go out and they were trying to make a new life for themselves in California. And what happened was Levi went out with the hardware store and he took a bunch of canvas. The idea was to go and make a load of tents and to go and sell that to the local communities. But what happened was the cost of living shot so high was that he couldn't sell any of his material. Now, what was interesting about Levi Strauss is if you look back through their legacy, he never really wanted to have the shop. His first intent wasn't to go and to make the canvases for the tents or even the jeans. He wanted to build an orphanage. He wanted to give bursaries and scholarships to students. He wanted to build a railway line that connected communities around San Francisco. So his company was the means to an end to get more money to be able to go and make a real difference and really leave a legacy. Now, what happened completely by accident, he couldn't sell his canvas to tents because people couldn't afford them. So they decided to make pants out of them. People started ripping the pants because of their tools from the gold rush. Then he looked at the horse blankets and found out they were riveted. Worked with his friend, they patented it, they started putting the rivets in, and that's where the original jeans came from. And all of that story then came out to become, the most popular denim brand in the world, doing what it is that they do. Now, they're going out doing fantastic stuff and doing all sorts of different things around celebrity endorsement. People don't often look back to that. There's a reason why I'd only buy Levi jeans. And I love Tom Ford, I love Christian Dior. I love a lot of different brands, but I would still buy Levi's jeans. And part of that for me, forgive me for being sentimental, that's why I love that brand. Not because I'm going to go out and tell people. I just feel like there's some sort of value in that just reminds me about why it is that we do what we do. So just the last personal example, and now we're going to get into some more kind of technical marketing stuff as well. I know you've all got your own stories, but this is another fantastic one. And I'll tell you why. This is, for the last few years, This is the most emotional story that I've seen around a brand. Now, just like Burberry, and just like Tom Ford and a lot of the luxury brands, when you're looking at overestimating the value of one brand to another, this isn't just because you're using better materials. This isn't just because they've got celebrities endorsing what it is that they do. It's because they revolutionized an industry or they changed something in a certain way. The iconic picture that you can see there on the right-hand side, that's actually 1947 when Dior was first founded. There was a 10-year window when Christian Dior was at the front, he was at the head of the Maison, and they built out this brand, and that 10-year legacy that Christian Dior left behind has gone on to build the house that it is today. But back then, just after the Second World War, in times of austerity, what they found, they were shocked that you'd use so much material. They were shocked that you would accentuate curves on a woman and have dresses like this. And as you can see here, people were so outraged, they were trying to rip her dress off. So you talk about someone that loves that brand because they're trying to empower women at a time when women didn't feel empowered, but also all the hate that may come with that, those extremes, the two sides of emotion. You can see that raised with the brand as well. And so how do we capitalize on that in a way that tells better stories and doesn't just sell more stuff, increases loyalty, builds more meaningful relationships? And I've never seen this at play any more than when I was in Vegas at the beginning of this year. What you can see on the right there is my friend Oscar. He's one of the ambassadors for North America. And I won't tell you the full story because it will take too long, but essentially we were in the store when the guy stumbled in that was going to commit suicide. He was in Vegas, he'd lost everything, and he genuinely was going to go and end his life. And we essentially tried to distract him. We were telling him some stories about the brand, we were trying to show him some stuff. Oscar's talking behind the scenes about, this is Celine Dion's bag, here's what Britney's bought. And we started getting into the emotions of a brand and what it stands for and joking about the prices and stuff. I was joking that people don't have relationships with brands. And over the course of over an hour, this guy's attitude changed and he started trying stuff on to the extent that he left all of his clothes in the store and he asked Oscar to throw it away. And he walked out of that store with this new knowledge that the idea of clothes were like suits of armor that you put on to arm yourself with the day and whatever's going to happen in that day. And his head was up and his shoulders were back and he trotted down the strip. And Oscar turned to me and he said, "Do you really think that guy's not going to have a relationship with a brand?" And I think we forget that in marketing. We forget the impact that stories can have. And it's not just the superficial side. Of course, there's a lot of that. You wear the thing just because Kardashian had it. There's a lot of brands that have traded on that. But also there is a deeper meaning to what it is that we do. And it has been for years. And it's been around the ideas of whether you're the corner shopkeeper or whether you're the luxury brand, how do we connect with people in a way that meets them exactly where they are at that moment in their life, that gives them exactly what they need when they want it? And sometimes those communities are tiny. The corner shops like this may have thrived on communities of 150 people that they know personally. But yet the temptation that we've got in marketing is that we try and build the big communities. We want our thousands and our millions of fans to be able to have them at scale, to get the likes, to build the followers. And nobody, I was going to swear then, nobody cares. When you start breaking things down to very small groups, that's where good stuff happens. Better to have 100 or 150 people that love you than 1 million people that kind of like you. So as we use marketing technology, as we start looking through all the journeys, we start looking at all the devices that we know that people cross as they're making their decisions. We start looking at the different stages of the buying cycle, from the second that we see someone's first interaction with the brand, all the way through to when they actually use their brand and they start getting some kind of value from it. Instead of trying to capture their data at the beginning, we should be trying to create more value. The problem that we have, and we've covered this before as well, hopefully this resonates with you guys on the phone, we're still spending more time trying to acquire more people's attention instead of trying to love the people that we've got. Marketers still focus more on new business than existing customers, and it's where we keep going horribly wrong. Couple of stats for you. 6 times cheaper to keep a customer than acquire a new one. A 5% increase in customer retention can generate a 75% increase in profitability. As a result of that, you see brands that loyalty leaders have a 15% cost advantage. What does that mean? If you're the loyalty leader, often, on average, you grow twice as fast as the rest of your market. So if that is true, and a lot of that comes down to telling better stories in order to get more people to love your brand so we can provide better experiences so that we can make more money to buy the right technology to go and do our jobs better, why are we still trying to acquire more people's attention? Why is it still? This is a great piece of research that I saw just a couple of days ago. Look at where the investment priorities are for 2017. Now, this is where a lot of you guys, I could see Ali, the agency, we were chatting about this the other day. You start looking at where we're trying to position our money, and everyone's got an agenda. I get it. Everyone is trying to serve their brands and the needs of their brands and their clients in a way that gives them what they want. And a lot of brands may want to have a huge amount spent on programmatic. A lot of brands have a vested interest in spending a lot in SEO. And you can see here, prioritized from online advertising, search display, all the way down to customer events, marketing, email. You can see that this is taking up the lion's share of where all the money's being spent. But actually, when you look further down the list, when you look at webinars, you guys have been gracious enough to listen to this today. 5-second attention span, really? You guys are listening to this for an hour. Hopefully it's valuable. But if we give enough people enough good content, that does build an amount of loyalty. You start looking at press and analyst relations. Often that is the foundation, the core of how you try and get credibility in an industry. It's got nothing to do with trying to get people to click more ads. It's trying to tell better stories and get credible people in the industry to share those stories. That's why partner marketing is so important. But yet the sad thing about this slide is that it sees that some of the most meaningful interactions and some of the most emotional connections that you would have with an audience, with a community, are the places where we spend the least amount of money. It feels to me like it's upside down. And when you look at that growth in digital, we're just trying to spend more. Of all the countries in the world, the UK is at the top last year, and this is going to tip over this year where China's going to become number one. But we're spending more and more and more in digital. That last slide, we're just going to spend more in that, whereas maybe what we should be doing sometimes is, do we need to put more into search and display and programmatic and different kind of click-to-buys instead of investing more in the experience? People forget that TV is still the most powerful way of getting a story out there for the majority of big brands. So it brings us back to this idea of love. So let me share with you a couple of things here, because this is really the core of what we're talking about. And if you guys have any aspirations of being better marketers and really trying to help the best marketers in the world be even better, these are two books that you need to know off by heart and inside out. These are two of my favorite people in the industry. This is Javier, who wrote Marketing, and he was inspired by Kevin Roberts, who was the chairman of Saatchi & Saatchi, the big advertising agency, and wrote a fantastic book called Love Marks. Love Marks was written just the year after Facebook was founded, 2005. And it was the idea of how do you get people to fall in love with a brand or an idea. Well worth a read, because it challenges you about this stuff, because what you will do is you go back and you will look at this and you will kind of look at it now through the filter of 2017 and think, is that still relevant? So what Javier's tried to do in his book Marketing is really try and bring all of this forward. So there's a lot of very, very close ties. And in fact, Kevin Roberts does the killer line right at the beginning of Javier's book when he talks about chief magic officers. The future belongs to the CMO, but it's not the chief marketing officer, it's the chief magic officer. It's all about how do you try and build those relationships. So the book Marketing is basically Javier's manual for how he built the brand at Coca-Cola to be the most loved, according to Interbrand anyway, the most loved, the biggest brand in the world. So that manual of how he did that, he basically published, and that's what marketing is about. So let me read to you a couple of the sections in this. I mentioned to you about how Javier's job was to try and get people to fall in love with Coke, but listen to what he said at the beginning. First thing I have to tell you is that I'm not in the beverage business, I'm in the brand business. This is a very important point. Keep in mind that the whole value of our business is inside people's brains. This isn't the rational part of their brains, it's the emotional side. So a brand's value resides in those little cookies we create to make people fall in love with the brand Coca-Cola. That was the first thing that he said. What else did he say? He started looking at, we need to whisper to people's hearts. Marketing is the process by which we make people fall in love with products and services through the creation of brands. What else did he say? You should define who you are. What is your brand personality? What do you stand for? What are your values? What are your beliefs? And of course, what is your point of differentiation versus the other guy? There are many ways to set this up. I often think about this in terms of IBM, so I'm constantly challenging myself. Do people love IBM? Would people fall in love with Watson? When you see the way that it's changing healthcare and the way that it's revolutionizing education and trying to reduce climate change and find cures for Alzheimer's, Crohn's and Parkinson's, this isn't just Watson trying to help people sell more stuff. This is really, really important emotional stuff. Now, there's a caution. So what Javier said at the end of his book, and this is something to bear in mind, and we're going to look at a couple of mechanics of the psychology behind this just now for the last kind of 15 minutes or so. Every year, large multinational companies launch thousands of new products and brands into the marketplace. About 75% of them die before completing their first year. Out of the survivors, only a tiny portion of them, usually less than 5%, stay around long enough to have a return on investment. All those multinational corporations have large research budgets, huge, elaborate protocols for assessing the potential of a new product or brand before it is launched, and still they fail. So think about the CMO. Think about the idea of how do you get people to fall in love with an idea and how do you get technology to help you do that. So if you've got 1 million customers, you can't market to everybody, but the best marketing technology, basically what it's doing is it's trying to break those 1 million people down into groups of 150. That's all it's trying to do. That's all we're trying to do at Watson Marketing through whatever the channel is that you kick out all of your content. We're trying to build it out to be even smaller, but the tenure of CMOs these days as senior marketers is often less than 2 years. But often it takes 2, 3, 4 years to actually show a return. So what does that mean when you've kind of got to be in it for the long term? Well, what we need to do is we need to make sure that whatever it is that we're doing, not just from the CMO, but even if you're the smallest, most junior marketer in your organization, even if you're the agency that's there to try and inspire the brand to try and do something different, what we've got to do is try and encourage people to tell better stories. It's not just to try and get them to click more ads. And if we can somehow make that permeate across the entire brand, we start to do what we mentioned before. We start looking at communities. We start looking at groups of people aligned around a common set of values and beliefs. We start to get groups of people that fall in love with each other. We start to improve morale within an organization, internally and externally. NPS shouldn't just be about how do you get people to love an idea or a brand and at what a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like them? This should be employee NPS as well. How much are you likely to recommend your company to your friends? How happy are you with your organization on a scale of 1 to 10? So I encourage you to go back and look at the last season of webinars that we did as well when we looked at the marketing priority pyramid, because it was based around this. It was based upon a Harvard Business Review model that was from 2016. I think it was August, and it was around the 30 different values and attributes of how you get people to connect emotionally with a brand or an idea. And a lot of it really leads up to this idea of self-transcendence, just like the origins of the Burberry story, just like the Dior story, just like the origins of Levi's. It's like, how do you try and get to that level where you're trying to stand for more than what you sell? So this is what Harvard bases everything on. And if you look back through marketing, if you look back through love marks, if you look at the best CMOs in the world that have built the strongest brands in the world, most of it comes down to this. It's not just looking at the priorities of how do we make more money and how do we try and get people to stay longer and deal with competition. It's really how do we just provide better experience. So again, you guys have heard me talk about North Face. We're not going to go over it now, but that Vimeo channel I mentioned, Vimeo.com, JP Waite, I talk about the story behind North Face. And I also talk about the reason that is such a powerful story is because that gives you an experience without asking for any data whatsoever. And it tries to create so much value that people maybe they won't love it to begin with, but if you like it so much, maybe you're going to give people your data. Maybe you're going to give them just your email to sign up for a newsletter. And then all of a sudden you've got the start of a customer journey. Then it's up to you to start trying to create more value. Now, let me just mention my friend that I was chatting to before, Alex Permain. He's one of the people I respect most in social media. He certainly inspired me in the early days when I was at Phones for You. He was the head of social at O2. We were just talking on Twitter before we started this webinar. He said, really? People really love brands? Have they ever? And he helped to build out one of the best YouTube channels I've ever seen. He didn't build it on trying to get people to fall in love with O2. He went and looked at the biggest problems that people had. And he looked at what are the top 100 things that we could do to solve those problems. And maybe we could release a 1-minute, 2-minute video to try and solve them. So instead of someone trying to get on a phone or go in a forum or a chat room or some peer-to-peer site, we could just point them to YouTube straight from Twitter and they can get an answer to their question instantly. And they saw not just the brand value, but the customer satisfaction shoot through the roof for O2. It was one of the best examples I've seen of, sometimes you don't need people to love your brand. You just need to provide better experiences. And that's what Jeremy said at a Marketing Society event was that not too long ago. He said, you can actually try too hard to try and build a relationship. It's just about being there for your customer when they want them. Why is that important? Because as we move into 2016, 17, 18, more people using voice, less people giving data, nobody wants to supply data to marketers anymore. This is why things like the North Face example is so important. I keep coming back to this, by the way, and if you guys are sick to death of hearing me talk about it, it's because there's not many case studies. There's hardly any case studies of when you've got an AI that's driving a website to try and understand the emotional needs of what it is that people want in real time in order to try and build out some kind of branded experience that then leads on to build a better customer journey. This is the Watson APIs that were used when you start building the North Face website. We're trying to look at the emotions behind it. What do people feel based upon the language, based upon what they've clicked on, based upon what they downloaded? What we should be doing now is trying to track and understand the emotions of people without wanting their personal data. We just understand the groups of an audience. We don't need to know everything about everybody. We just need to know a few things about a lot of people. And as we go out over to 2020, the question we need to be asking ourselves is, what is the mood of our audience? Not what did they click on. Big difference. Now what we see, and we've seen this consistently across the brands that we've been working with privately and some of the public ones that are being developed at the moment, not only has social access dropped through the floor, people don't log in with Twitter and Facebook anymore. People don't want to give access to all this because they know how much data you can get hold of. And people are nervous. People are skeptical and they value their privacy and they want complete transparency. But we're still seeing that email is still the number one channel. This is research from 2015, but we're seeing that this is still true. When you start out those customer journeys, and this goes for B2B brands and B2C brands, this is the most important place that we need to start. That's why a lot of the demos that we build out, we start with email. It might not always feel sexy. We might want the temptation to start with, this is the private messaging app that has the bot that goes to build out the thing that gets the emotion. If you want to actually value audiences and get the biggest impact, and also if you want to try and impress the CFO and the CTO to get more money to do more cool stuff, you've got to focus on the fundamentals and the basics and connecting sales, marketing, and customer service. And most of that, like it or not, still revolves around email. So I've launched a couple of videos. The Watson Marketing Assistant that you can see there in the bottom right, this is the Vimeo channel I mentioned to you. That's an example of how you could use emotional intelligence driven by an AI to understand how to build a customer journey. The only reason I did that demo is to try and see how could you build a more emotional connection with somebody through something as plain as transactional as an email. So it might be worth you having a look at that. Remember the slide that we was looking at before about where people were spending their money? Google Forbes Insights and look at this thought leadership in action. When you look at the sentiment and you look at the demos and you look at all the different things that we can do to try and get our stories across, the reason that I did that Watson Marketing Assistant demo is because it's live data. I hate using PowerPoint. In fact, I'm going out of my way to not use it anymore because live visualization, live data tools are actually much more valuable to tell stories when I'm speaking at a conference or a presentation. What this chart is showing is the most valuable channels for connecting emotionally with a chief executive. The format for trying to get your story across where people would want to work with you. And blogs and podcasts and social media, infographics and slide decks, for the most part, provide very, very little value, yet that is still where we're spending a huge amount of our money. got our huge content calendars and conversation strategy and blog posts we're trying to kick out. But yet what we should be doing is giving more value through long-form content, articles, reports, writing business books. People argue there's no case for business books anymore. Fundamentally disagree. This is what people want. If you've got something good enough to say, people are going to pick up that book and they're going to read it. If you've got a good enough demo, don't show me a couple of slides on PowerPoint. Show me it working and show me a live version of it and show me how it can change my life. These are the types of things that we need to be doing better. So as we end, we have about 3 minutes left. Let me just leave you with a couple of thoughts, because whatever the story is that you're going to try and tell, in order to try and connect with your customers and also internally your stakeholders and your bosses, it's got to have a structure. This doesn't matter whether it's a 60-second pitch, whether it's a strap line, whether it's a press advert, whether it's a Facebook post, or whether or not you're going to go out and give a 60-minute keynote or a movie, or you're trying to do the next tale of Thomas Burberry and inspire people to fall in love with your brand or your idea. It's got to have a format. It's got to start off on a journey. There needs to be a protagonist. There needs to be an obstacle. There needs to be a conflict. And as you start looking through the structure of some of the best talks and the best presentations in the world, they all have the same structure, no matter how long or short that piece of content is. Go and have a look for everything that either Matthew Luhn, L-U-H-N, Matthew Luhn on Twitter, or look at the TED Talks from Andrew Stanton. They talk about the same thing. Nancy Duarte talks about how some of the best presentations in the world have actually followed the Pixar storytelling format. It's exactly the same formula. If I was working with a brand right now, and I've done this at IBM, I've been looking at some of the decks that we go and try and take to market. I want to rebuild those decks in the style of Finding Nemo. How do I set out on the journey? How do I set the stage? Think about how I started today. There was obstacles, there was conflict, there was marketers are terrified, where the world's changing faster, we can't keep up short attention span. But one day, this happened, and because of that, it's really bad. But then here's AI, but then people are nervous and they don't want to give their data. But then here's this great North Face example, but it's not mature and people haven't got the money until finally. It's the same thing. This is what I believe you guys need to be doing more of within your businesses. If you need some more inspiration, click on Little Bees. Go and search for the Little Bee books. We have a whole series of books. You're allowed to either download the PDFs or we'll post you all the books for free. We'll help you tell stories about the most technical parts of our business. This is us essentially doing the Pixar storytelling format to describe how blockchain works, or Apache. We're trying to look at the weather and big data, machine learning and Apache. Have a look at that and think about how it is that you could try and tell better stories within your brand. And hopefully, maybe, people might fall in love with your brand. I hope that was useful. We're 49 minutes in. I took 46 minutes of your time. There was some good stuff in there. What do you guys think?
Well, we've got a lot of questions here, so let's find out what people are thinking, Jeremy. But thank you very much for all of that really interesting insight. So let's crack on with the questions. So we've got one here which says, Jeremy, do you think a brand needs to create a community or a sense of community to create brand love?
I do, 100%. Great question, Ali. Thank you very much. Think about what a community is. And this is one of the best piece of advice I could ever give you. There was a great book, I think it's by M. Scott Peck, and it was a different drum, and he was talking about community. Dunbar's number is also great when you look at communities of 150 people. But what M. Scott Peck talks about is, what does a real community look like? And in fact, if you Google community and M. Scott Peck, or you Google a different drum, he looks at the values of a community. And it's things like people that love and support each other, people that have a purpose greater than themselves. It's people that in times of need and conflict, they come together and they stick together. Think about, we talk about community all the time in marketing, and often we talk about communities on Facebook. If you go and look down those values, and I think there's about 10 or 12 of them, go and look back at any community that you've ever tried to build, influencer communities, outreach communities, brand advocates, whatever it is, and go and think, do those communities have the same attributes that sit within that group? And I guarantee you 99% of them won't, because they don't love and support each other. Everybody's got an agenda. Everyone's trying to click to buy to do the next thing. You're trying to buy their attention to get them to say the thing, to get someone to buy more stuff. So the core of any brand And if a brand is what goes on in somebody's head, it's how do you get groups of like-minded people to do that? Where we fall over is that we think that our communities need to be big and based on scale. And even the biggest brands in the world, Red Bull's a great example. Actually, when you look at their audiences and you break them down, they are actually in very, very small chunks. It's just that when you piece them all together, it looks like it's a huge brand. There's millions of examples I could give you, but absolutely 100%. And also, the thing that gives you a lot of hope is that it doesn't take a lot of work to do that. You know, I built out my blog, jeremy.live, on a WordPress template for £56. And I started publishing content. It's exactly the same format that you could be using for any brand or any new idea. You know, it doesn't have to be expensive, because if you say good stuff, it really doesn't matter what the vehicle or the channel is. People are going to find you, and people are going to gather together, because that's how communities work.
Super, that was brilliant. Thanks for that, Jeremy. We've got quite an interesting one here. So how do you grow brand loyalty, or maybe maintain brand loyalty, through a business transformation?
This always happens, doesn't it? We get amazing questions that require 45-minute answers. As usual, I'm going to recommend a couple of books and give you a statistic which will kind of throw you a word of caution. If you want to look at how to measure brand loyalty, there is a book called The Loyalty Effect. It's written by Fred Reichheld. If you go and buy it on Amazon, Amazon will probably recommend, as Amazon does, other books that you will also like, and it's probably going to recommend you to bundle 3 together, which is The Loyalty Effect, The Ultimate Question, and The Ultimate Question 2.0. The Loyalty Effect talks through exactly how to build brand value and how to measure it. It talks about how to measure the lifetime value, and it gives you all the technical side of how to do that. Why are those 3 books important? Those are written by the guy that invented the Net Promoter Score, which is ultimately how you try and grow brand loyalty. Now, word of caution, said I'd give you a stat. When you look at digital transformation, or you look at any kind of brand transformation, it takes a really, really long time. And the bigger the company, the longer it takes. I heard a stat from Pricewaterhouse, PwC, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, one of their most senior people. They were saying now that digital transformation on average has a 15% success rate, which is only 2% more than gambling at a casino. So there's a lot of risk involved, and there's a very long tail involved in digital transformation. So if you don't have stakeholders bought in for the long term, beyond ones that just think very short term, quarter to quarter, campaign by campaign, everything else is going to fall over. Building the community takes a really long time. Gary Vaynerchuk spent a lot of time trying to inspire people in social media to build their own communities, like he did in Wine Library TV. But he talks about, as I do, how do you try and build it from the bottom up with a very small group of people, and internally you've got to get the stakeholders aligned first, because if you don't get buy-in from the top, at some point everything else is going to fall over, especially when people change jobs.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, moving on to the next one. So this one's about bad marketing. So how does bad marketing affect customer and brand loyalty?
Oh my goodness. I don't want to be flippant, because that is a really great question. Thanks, Chelsea. But we've all got examples of how that's affected brand loyalty. In fact, let me put it this way. If you go back and you look at that book I just recommended, Ultimate Question 2.0, there's a brilliant case study in that by Dell, and they look at what happened when people are very, very upset. And they use examples like, if you get an extremely negative tweet, it takes up to 7 positive tweets to cancel it out. And as a result of that, you have to have big social media communities and lots of community managers to try and deal with that. You think about the crisis at VW. You think about all the people that have been giving BA a hard time. You think about all the people that jumped on Nike to drop the athlete when, you know, everything happened with Lance. I'm sure the same thing is happening now when you look at Tiger. And it's happened all over again through the history of brand marketing. Something bad's happened. Of course it's affected brand value. You saw Toyota. In fact, if we go back, if we look at that, the interbrand chart, where are we? There we are. If I push that to you guys, you know, all of these downward spirals, you look at any of these brands that have taken a nosedive, all of these have happened because something went wrong. Whether that was, you know, Nokia with the impact of the way that they were looking at their burning platform in the launch of the iPhone, whether it's the sticky accelerator pedals at Toyota, or et cetera, et cetera. There's millions of examples. The challenge for a marketer is just to be there and be ready for when it happens. And the only way that you can successfully do that is to have technology that can show you in real time when it happens, because we need to be able to predict the crisis instead of just being responsive to deal with it when it happens. And there's no excuse for that in 2017. Based upon audiences and emotions, we should be able to predict stuff a lot better, especially when we start seeing people get emotional about bad things.
Yeah. No, okay, and I think we've got time for one last question.
Okay.
So if you had 3 top tips of how to build brand loyalty on a small budget, what would they be?
Wow, brand loyalty on a small budget. I'm going to assume that, let me answer this as the person asking the question rather than what a brand should do, because all you guys are on the line trying to figure out what to do next and how to be better at your jobs. Yes, let me do this. You've got a small budget. The quick answer is build a community, and build one community. Don't build thousands of them. Find out the things that your audience is most passionate about and start talking about that. Find the most important channel for them. Chances are it may not be your own blog. It's quite possible for, let's say, for IBM audiences that we should be putting that on LinkedIn, and we shouldn't be putting that on some of the IBM properties. We may get more credibility doing that somewhere else. And often we see that. It's up to you guys as to what that channel is. You understand where your customers are going and what they're doing by channel. You should be able to do that. Some of you guys, it may be a Facebook group to go and build those communities. But when you say what 3 things should you do, let me ask the bigger question about how to make sure that you're in the position to give people the best advice as you're trying to grow your brand. 3 things that you should do every day. Watch 1 TED Talk. Listen to 1 podcast. I recommend A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz. They release 1 a week. If you want to launch 1 podcast and listen to 1 every day, Mitch Joel, 6 Pixels, the best marketing podcast on iTunes, certainly probably the best marketing podcast in the world I've listened to. If you don't know where to start, just go and search Mitch Joel and Seth Godin when they did their podcast first week of January. So listen to 1 podcast a day, listen to 1 TED Talk a day, and watch Bloomberg Technology. They're at Technology on Twitter. They live stream their magazine show every night. You can even go on their iPad app and download it in little 3-minute chunks. If you just do those 3 things, I guarantee you will be in the top 5% of any marketer in the world that understands kind of how you should build out communities in line with the way that behavior is changing. And as long as your main concern is helping people to fall in love with your brand or serving them when they need you, then all of those assets and the learnings that you're going to get from A16Z, from TED, from Mitch Joel, and from Bloomberg are going to help you make the right decisions. And of course, you're going to buy the right technology, which is Watson Marketing, to help you do your jobs better. Thank you, everybody. Sorry, couldn't resist.
Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you, Jeremy, for all of that interesting insight. Hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thanks.